That back in training camp of 2019, Sean McDermott used a 9/11 analogy to try to teach the value of teamwork.
It's very well sourced, but there's a lot of stuff there. There's a lot there that does not make Sean McDermott look good. He cited 9/11 from the perspective of the attackers.
Comments that he made back in 2019 have come back to light.
My intent in the meeting that day was to discuss the importance of communication and being on the same page with the team. I regretted mentioning 9/11 in my message that day. The goal of the team meeting was about the importance of communication. To be honest with you, I'm not here to discuss the article that's out there and the things that are mentioned, other than this right here, because this right here is very, very important to me. One player didn't seem that I didn't make my point clear enough. And so right then and there, I said, we're getting together as a team and we're talking, and I'm gonna address this with everyone. We brought everybody together and said this was the goal, this was the intent, and I apologize if anyone whatsoever felt a certain type of way coming out of that meeting. If anyone misinterpreted or didn't understand my message, I apologize. I didn't do a good enough job of communicating clearly.
What the fuck is going on in Buffalo right now? How do you even begin to make this mistake? For anyone who doesn't know what happened, Buffalo Bills head coach Sean McDermott gave the team a speech in 2019. He was trying to convey the importance of communication. During that speech, he decided to use 9/11 as an example of effective communication. Now, when I first heard this, I thought to myself, well, I think that it's a mistake to talk about 9/11, such a tragic day in American history. But having said that, I get that we did actually have a lot of effective communication that day between the fire departments, between the police departments, from dispatchers to the fire department, between the air traffic controllers of the various airports that were involved, because we had to land planes elsewhere. A lot of them were rerouted from their original landing spots in New York. So I actually did think to myself, like, I don't know that I'd use 9/11 as an example, but I guess I kind of see where Sean McDermott was coming from. That was before I got a chance to actually read the post. And when I read the article, that's when I saw what Sean McDermott actually said. He told the entire team they needed to come together. But then sources on hand say he used a strange model. The terrorists on September 11th, 2001. He cited the hijackers as a group of people who were all able to get on the same page to orchestrate attacks to perfection. One by one, McDermott started asking specific players in the room questions. What tactics do you think they used to come together? A young player tried to methodically answer. What do you think their biggest obstacle was? A veteran then answered TSA, which mercifully lightened the mood. One of the players told Dune, I don't know why he's that awkward, but his social skills are lacking. Maybe he's just wound up thinking about ball. You've got to talk to the team every day. That's one where maybe he heard it on a podcast. Next episode, that's not the one to lead with. He was just trying to bring the team together. It was a horrible, horrible reference. He missed the mark. So let me get this straight, Sean. The lesson is that your team needs to have communication skills similar to those of Qaeda. Because Qaeda did such a great job, and they're such a great example for us to try and follow in, right? What the fuck? You're using Qaeda as an example of good communication? To make matters worse, there is only one team that still plays in New York, the state where this horrible tragedy on September 11th happened, and that's the Buffalo Bills. I know technically the closer teams are the Jets and the Giants, but they technically play in New Jersey. So the only team that actually plays in the state where this horrible incident happened on September 11th is the Buffalo Bills, and that's whose head coach actually used Qaeda as an example of positivity. Like, how tone deaf could you possibly get? I think Sean is still tone deaf. I think he still can't read the room. He doesn't even realize what the big issue is with this. Listen to this fucking apology.
If anyone misinterpreted or didn't understand my message, I apologize. I didn't do a good enough job of communicating clearly.
In other words, I don't think that using Al-Qaeda was the problem. I think that I just didn't communicate the story well enough. What you're saying is that it's not that you feel bad about using Al-Qaeda as an example, it's that you think you could have done it better. That's not the issue. The issue isn't that the players didn't understand what you were trying to say, which is that we need to have good communication. It's that the players are disgusted, rightfully so, that you used Al-Qaeda as a fucking example of good communication. How fucking sick in the head are you, dude? Like, how fucked up are you that that's the example you fucking go to? Do you know how many people they fucking killed that day? 2,996 human beings on planet Earth gone. No longer on fucking planet Earth. The people who were in those buildings that fucking jumped out. Can you even imagine being in the fucking position where you have to make that decision? Where you're looking out the window going, well, I'm either going to burn to death, get collapsed on, or I can jump out the window and end it right here. The guys that did that to our people, the guys that did that to our fucking country, the monsters that put us through that bullshit, that destroyed the lives of all these brothers, sisters, aunts, uncles, mothers, children, the monsters that destroyed these fucking lives. That's the example you use for good communication? You couldn't think of anything the fuck else for good communication? You couldn't think of, even on our side that day, you couldn't have even thought to go, hey, let's consider the communication that our firefighters had that day. Once again, I don't think it's a great idea to use 9/11 as an example, because I just think there's so many better, more positive circumstances we could explore to talk about good communication. But I could at least see the wisdom of that lesson. I could see the wisdom of using the firefighters, of using the police that day, of using the control centers that day, and how they all had to communicate. I can see the wisdom of that. What I can't fucking understand, Sean, is how fucking stupid and thick you have to be to think that using Al-Qaeda's communication is a good example of communication skills. To wake up that morning and go, you know what? We're going to have a team meeting today, and I know what we're going to fucking talk about. We're going to talk about how great Al-Qaeda's communication was. Holy fuck, Sean. And Bill's Mafia, I've been reading the comments, you know, and I shouldn't go after Bill's Mafia. Looking at my YouTube stats, it does show that the two places I'm most popular is Seattle and Buffalo. And I actually I was born in Buffalo, so it makes sense why I'm trending in those two spots. But like, I currently live outside of Seattle. I don't have an issue with Bill's Mafia. You know, and look, state how you feel. It's up, you know, you decide how this makes you feel. I'm telling you how this makes me feel personally, as a veteran, as somebody who, I don't know, has spent I don't know how many hours talking about Al-Qaeda and talking about terrorist attacks and talking, you know, working in anti-terrorism, doing all the fucking things I did when I was in the military, and I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole. But like, Sean McDermott's, you know, lighthearted use of Al-Qaeda as an example is disturbing. It's fucked up. Now, I'm not sitting here trying to say that Sean McDermott is a bad guy. I'm not saying he's a bad man. I'm not saying to you know, do anything to him or his family. Please don't. Look, I don't think he's a bad guy. I think that he made a monumentally stupid decision. I think he still doesn't grasp the seriousness of that decision. Just based on his apology, based on his press conference, and I did watch the full thing. I know I'm only giving you guys small clips. You can go out there and find the full thing if you want. I watched the full thing. Just based on it, it's just kind of, he's acting like a, aw shucks, whoop-de-doo. Oh darn, I shouldn't have said that. That was wrong. You know, he's acting like he accidentally like dropped a cuss word, you know, in a press conference or something. He's acting like he accidentally used a bad example or an outdated metaphor, or you know how like the term gypped is not a term that you can use anymore because it's actually offensive to, it comes from, you know, the whole gypsy culture, and it comes from all, you know, it's like he's acting like he dropped a term that he didn't know. If he just said, oh, we got gypped, not realizing that that's not politically correct anymore. He's acting like that's what he did wrong. Sean, no, you did something so much fucking worse. You downplayed the worst tragedy to ever happen to this country. We have never had an attack on American land that killed more people than that day. Pearl Harbor didn't kill as many people. There were so many other ways that you could have articulated the importance of communication. You could have used like I said, you could have used our guys. You could have used the Black Hawk Down situation and how they had to communicate with the guys on the field and they had to communicate back to the talk. And, you know, military is generally a good example of effective communication. You could have done that. You could have used historically great NFL teams in the past that had effective, great communication that would have signs and signals and things they would do. You could have used baseball players as an example because they always have all these signs and signals. You could have used a kitchen, you know, the communication that the head chef has to have to the sous chef, to all the other chefs back there. The reason I know as much as I know about this is because I watch a lot of Hell's Kitchen. You could have just thrown on an episode of Hell's Kitchen, actually, and then we could have talked about communication. You could have used a fictional movie. You could have used, like, Star Wars, and even if you wanted to go on the side of the bad guys, guess what? It wouldn't, like, because it's a fictional movie, you could sit there and go, well, the Sith were kind of right because of this, this, and this. Well, you know, they kind of had a point to blow up Alderaan because it turns out the people in Alderaan kind of suck. You know, like, you could have said any of that bullshit and it wouldn't offend anybody. Nobody would care because it's Star Wars. You could have said, you know what, Anakin was right to kill the kid. Nah, you can't do that. Anything else you could have done and you could have said, and it wouldn't offend anybody. Yeah, the Anakin thing, that's fucked up. Dude, there were so many better options. There were infinitely better options, you know? Like, this is... You wouldn't use, like, Adolf Hitler as a good example of leadership, would you? Maybe you would, you crazy fuck. I mean, like, to be honest with you, if you think that using Al-Qaeda is the best way to talk about good communication, yeah, maybe you would think that using Adolf Hitler, that's the best example of effective leadership. It was very effective if you want to look at it objectively. Let's just, you know, let's brush that off and lighten that up a little bit. Use that as our next fucking example. And the other thing is, like, this isn't the only incident where apparently you came off as tone deaf when you were addressing your team, giving them a speech. There was the so-called Niagara Falls speech. In December of 2021, locals will recall the news of a woman deliberately driving into the waterway that spills into the falls, Dune explains. She drifted down the Niagara River before her vehicle was lodged against a rock about 50 yards from the brink. McDermott studied up and pieced together a speech. The coach explained how members from the Coast Guard did everything they could to save the woman. He built up the drama, players held on tight for an inspiring apex, and nothing. He said the woman died, end of story. The complete absence of a point had some players biting their tongues, trying their hardest not to laugh. Now, I'll be honest, when I read this earlier, I did bust out laughing my ass off just because of, not because it's funny that the woman died, is of course not. The part that's just downright hilarious is how fucking tone deaf you could possibly be. I mean, I was picturing this as like, this is like an SNL sketch or something. Like, I'm picturing Will Ferrell coming in, trying to, like, you know, cheer up a locker room and trying to give them an inspirational speech, and then it just ends with, and the woman died. You know, and then the players being like, oh, well, like, but we learned a lesson from that, right, coach? Oh, no, it was terrible. She just died a gruesome death. You know, like, I'm picturing the comedy of how obnoxious it would be to come into a room and give that speech, and you actually did that shit in real life. And the part that really bums me out is, as I'm reading the comments on YouTube under your press conference, and, you know, Bill's Mafia is being very supportive. Hey, Sean, you made a mistake, not that big of a deal. We've still got your back, coach. We still believe in you. Blah, blah, blah. Like, they're saying all these positive, nice things to you. And, like, I'm not trying to shit on you too hard, but I am trying to knock some reality in here, which is that, like, you fucked up really bad, and people are downplaying how bad you fucked up. People, I feel like a lot of people, it's not hitting the mark. It's not hitting the right spot. It's hitting, oh, we're kind of disappointed. I wish you'd do better. Like, we're hitting that level. We're not talking about the fact that, dude, this is straight up anti-American rhetoric. Like, that's actually what we're talking about here. This is terrorism sympathizing. Is what we're in that category of fucked up here. We're in the category of the people who, like, get recruited by ISIS on their Facebook pages. You know, because if the one player who suggested, like, hey, maybe he heard it on a podcast, if that part is true, if you really did hear something on a podcast and that inspired this thought that made you go, hey, I'll use this to the team, what fucking podcasts are you listening to? What fucked up shit is going on in your world that you're bringing this type of energy in? Like, this goes so deeper than beyond just, I used a bad example. You know, Sean, clearly, after you've done this twice now, with two different horrific incidents, one significantly, 2,996 dead. I mean, one, the darkest day in American history. Maybe you just shouldn't give team speeches. There's plenty of coaches around the league that aren't good at the whole speech thing, so they just don't give speeches. They let the team leaders do the speeches, people who are good at it. They let the other coaches do speeches, people who are good at it. Maybe you should just stop. Don't give any more fucking team speeches. You're not good at it. Talk strategy, talk theory, talk, X's and O's, do analytics, do all the stuff that doesn't require a lot of thinking, because when you have to think and get creative on your own, you are not fucking good at it, dude. If there's been 2 different incidents, you literally used a woman who killed herself on Niagara Falls, you used that as an example of trying hard but failing. I don't even know what the lesson is there. At least the Al-Qaeda thing, I know what the attempted lesson was. Look, I'm not calling for Sean McDermott's job. I'm not calling for his head. I'm not calling for the Bills to move on from him. He's been tremendous for that organization. He's won a lot of football games. As he said in his press conference, you haven't won so much this year, sitting at 6-6 right now. Look, I'm not calling for Sean McDermott's job. He's a really good coach. What I do think is that you owe the American people, not Bills fans, the American people, you owe them a more comprehensive apology. You owe them a real apology. You owe the victims of 9/11. 2,996 people died. That means there's 10 times that of family members of those victims. You owe them a fucking apology. You owe the American people an apology. You owe an apology for making light of the darkest day in American history. And I think that if I was you have a net worth, I looked this up, you have a net worth of $10 million. If I was you, I would make a big donation. I'm thinking $1 million. I'm thinking 10% of your net worth. I think you make a big donation to the families of the firefighters who died that day, and the families of the other victims who died that day. I think that you show that, no, I really, really feel bad about my comments. Now, if you don't feel bad about it, if you don't feel ashamed about it, then don't issue an apology you don't mean. Don't give out money to something just to try to wipe the slate clean. I'm not saying that you can buy your way to redemption. I'm saying you got to show that you care. And I think a substantial donation does that. I think it shows that at least you cared enough to write a check. So at least you did the minimum, But just kind of brushing this off the way you have, just kind of thinking, no, we're just going to move on and it's business as usual. And if we win on Sunday, everyone will forget this. Look, that's just not reality, Sean. It's not. We're not ever forgetting this. We're not forgetting that you did this. This will be one of the things where they'll go, even if you win 3 Super Bowls and we're going, oh, he's the best Bills head coach of all time, did all these great things, blah, 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 donates to charity, all this. Somebody in that conversation, whether it's in their head or out loud, will go, yeah, but remember that weird 9/11 thing he said? And someone else will go, oh, yeah, what was that? That's always going to happen now, Sean. My fear is that you're actually not sorry. My fear is you're sorry that the story broke. You're sorry that you got caught. You're sorry that people know that you said this and you're embarrassed about that people found out. You're not sorry about the example. Because to be honest, you should be embarrassed by this. You should be ashamed of this. You should feel sick that you said this. You don't. At least based on the apology that we got, you don't. And while I will definitely forgive you in time, I'm not, I don't hold grudges, that type of thing. Don't think that forgiveness means that this is anything less than a total and utter disgrace to our country and a complete disappointment and failure on your part.